ladies and gentlemen, we'd now like to take you through our next speaker, who is very, very special. She is the internationally best-selling author of Softening the Edge, and she is the host of the Empathy for Breakfast Show podcast, the founder of Empathy Everywhere, CEO of the world's most free advertising agency, Freedom, and works predominantly to connect people and organizations with mutual human understandings. Ladies and gentlemen, she is here to create a change, and she's here to drive something more. Everybody give it to Mimi Nicklin. And Mimi is going to tell us more about innovation in empathy, influence, and creativity. The stage is all yours, Mimi. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm not going to dance, okay? I came in and you were all dancing. You made my day. I'm not going to dance, but I am going to talk to you about leadership and about the people that are behind some of the things you've already been talking about this morning. So what is it that's behind the tech that is changing our world? I'm going to start by just mentioning that it's quite complex out there. Right? It's quite a complex world. And if I'm really honest, this morning, this slide said leadership in crisis. But then I hung out in here for a little while, and I was like, these guys are not in crisis. This is like full of energy and innovation. But however exciting it is here, the world is super complex. I do work all across the world, and from 2020 onwards, it's just getting more difficult. So I've got a question for you all this afternoon. Can you predict the future? After the last conversation, perhaps we can, actually. I think when you look at data, you probably can. But can you do it personally? I'm going to go out on a whim and say that I can. Okay, I'm pretty confident that I can. Why? Because I know this. Everything will change. It always does. And anyone that's been waiting for things to go back to how they were in 2019, you're going to be waiting a very long time because it's not coming back. The only constant that we have in a leader's lifespan is that fact, that it is going to constantly change. Just when you think you're comfortable, it's going to shift again. Now, every time we have had an industrial revolution, we've seen that change speed up, right? It has fast-tracked development. But there's one key shift with this industrial revolution. Well, there's a few, actually, but there's one key shift in this fourth industrial revolution. And that is that it really impacts you and your jobs. So the other three tended to impact the people at the bottom, the people on the factory floor, the people making the goods. Their jobs changed. Their requirements, their skill sets changed. All of us at the top in leadership, we carried on. The machines changed, we didn't. But that has changed this time. The fourth industrial revolution is not just about business or tech, the actual machines. It's about society. And when anything's about society, that means it impacts all of us because, of course, we make up society. Now, some of these brands have already been on stage today. We know, of course, that technology is shifting business behavior. Uber, probably the biggest taxi company in the world, owns no cars. Airbnb, the biggest accommodation provider in the world, has no accommodation, and so it goes on. But have we thought about what it means for leadership? What does it mean for the social change that we're all facing in the jobs we do every day? Because after all, behind the tech, behind all that amazing data you saw just before I came up here, somebody started it. There are people behind those platforms. So this industrial revolution, these times that we're living in that are so complex, are shifting how we lead. Within the technological change, what we do every day as leaders is changing. I want to start today by talking about Satya Nadella. He happens to be my favorite leader of all time. I've never met him, so if anyone knows him, please hand him my Instagram. But I talk about Satya a lot because he talks about empathy a lot. And him and I have that in common. He says this. He says that our role as leaders is to empower humans to achieve more. He doesn't talk about the functional pieces, about moving to AI-led data analytics, although that's incredibly important. He's talking about you. He's talking about you and your people that are making these shifts together as you move into the future. Now, I want to tell you a story about Satya. And he has a great book, by the way, called Hit Refresh. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend it. But he tells a story in there, and you can Google this story. It's out there quite a lot. Satya spent his whole career at Microsoft. And when he was really young, I think he was 23, he went to do one of those full-day interview sessions. I'm sure you guys probably have them in your business, where the new guys come in and they have to write code and show how genius they are in 7 hours of back-to-back interviews. And he says he got to the last one, and it was with the senior vice president of something very clever. And he went in ready. He was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to write code and show him how great I am. And this vice president sat him down and said, Satya, I've only got one question for you. If you saw a child on the street crying, what would you do? And Satya said that without any hesitation, he said, well, I'd call 911. I'd call the emergency services. And the vice president stood up and walked him to the door and said, Satya, my friend, if you're going to work at Microsoft, you're going to need to work on your empathy. If you see a child crying on the floor, you pick it up. And he showed Satya out. Now, of course, it went quite well for Satya, because he then went on to return $1 trillion over the next 6 years as the third CEO that Microsoft has ever had. But he talks about that moment as an integral shift in the leader in tech that he is. He says this, he says, most people think that empathy is something that you reserve for your friends or family. But the reality is, it is an existential business priority. He doesn't believe that without empathy for each other and for the technology that we're developing, that we can succeed in the world of business that we live in. So what is it? What is empathy, and why do you need it when we're living in this fourth revolution and we've got lots of other things to worry about? Fundamentally, we're talking about you being able to create your leadership perspective. This is about you being able to understand the opinions, the viewpoint, the context of the people sitting next to you. The people that ask questions in the break. Why did they ask them? Why are they interested in the answer? What does it mean to them? The people that didn't ask, why didn't they? Why is that employee in your team still coming late every single week, even though you've spoken to them about it? What is happening from their point of view? Organizational empathy is the ability to understand your teams, clients, stakeholders, the board of directors, your customers, to balance two things: humanism and capitalism. We all need to make money, guys. That's why you're all here talking about the future. When we talk about this leadership shift that's happening, this is not about emotions. This is not about being nice. This is not about being kind, although all those things are lovely, by the way. This is about balancing your growth with growth for your people so that both of them can grow together. This is what organizational empathy is, and by the way, it will future-proof your business. As I mentioned earlier, there is no going back. This need to be understood in the workplace, to be seen by your boss, to have a team that gets you, isn't going to change all across the world. Why is it not going to change? Because of this. We're suffering with what's known as an empathy deficit, and it's all around the world. Empathy is evolutionary. Okay? It is built into your brain, into your prefrontal cortex. You can't not have it. You all have it. The question I probably get asked most is, but Mimi, don't you have more empathy than everybody else? The answer is no. You, your neighbor, your wife, your husband, your friends, your boss, we've all got the same amount of empathy, but we can choose to use it. The challenge is we haven't been. So all the way back in 2006, Obama, before he was president, stood up and spoke to his audience and said, I know that we should be talking about our federal deficit, but I think we should be talking about our empathy deficit. And then us being humans, being super busy and all over the place, we did nothing about it. And we're now in the middle of 30 years of declining empathy. Empathy is evolutionary. This sounds quite dramatic, but society cannot thrive without it. We cannot. Nothing you've discussed in this 2-day conference as you go through it can you do on your own. You just can't. You can't do the coding and the analytics and the leadership and the rollout. You just can't. Business is not a one-player game. We have to work together. The good news is, since I wrote my book about this in 2020, there has been a massive shift. And this is now a trending conversation. So if you go away today and Google empathy and whatever your interest is, whether that's leadership, profitability, operationalization, output, performance, media, whatever you're interested in, you will find content. Because the discussion around empathy is now all over the place. And for anybody that noticed Jacinda Ardern's resignation last week in New Zealand, you will have seen this word in pretty much every headline around the world. It is often coined as the most important leadership skill in our time. Why? Because how can you truly lead anybody if you don't understand them? I can't tell you how many people ask me, somebody will ask it in the questions, I'm sure, but Mimi, how do I run a hard business and make profit and make really tough decisions and be nice to people? I say, well, empathy's got nothing to do with being nice. It's really nice if you're nice. But what empathy is your ability to understand the people that you have to make tough decisions with. Because there is no human that doesn't have the need to be understood. We know this from as young as 18 minutes old. As human beings, we have to be seen and heard. That's why I say this is evolutionary. You can't survive without it. But equally, there isn't a human here or anywhere that won't do better and perform better when that need for understanding is fulfilled. I'm not going to go into the business data around this today because I don't have enough time, but there is practically no KPI, no key performance indicator that doesn't go up when organizational empathy goes up. Productivity, output per capita, profitability per head, tenure, loyalty, motivation, you name it, and there's a university that's researched it. When empathy is high, the organization does well. That's why I talk about balancing humanism with capitalism. When you manage the humans, the business grows. I want to just put 2 stats in here for you because they're my 2 favorite. And I'm on the stage, so I get to choose, which is the best bit about being on the stage. 76% of people say that motivation is higher and they're willing to work longer hours. I'm not sure many people in India can work much longer hours, but this is global, that they're willing to work longer hours for an empathetic leader. What that tells us is people will open up extra performance for you if you see them, if you notice them, if you listen to them. But this one's even better. 79% of people, so nearly 80% of us, would change our job, our industry, and our role. Everything you know, everything you've ever done, every job you've ever had, 80% of people say they'll leave it all, simply to find a boss that listens to them, that hears them, that understands them. That's pretty epic. When I talk about times changing, it has changed. And of course, we saw this in the Great Resignation last year. We continue to, where people just walk out of very long careers, not always with a clear plan. The good news is we're not born with a fixed amount of it. We're all born with it, but it's a competence we can master. And that's why I get to do the work I do and get to talk to people like you and say, let's put it up, let's increase this. The deficit has to be reversed. Our businesses, but our society, our children depend on it. As I mentioned at the beginning, fundamentally, tech is only ever as impactful as the humans behind it, which is, I'm assuming, part of the reason that you all get the opportunity to have conferences like this. The tech is happening anyway, with or without you. How you manage it with your teams in your businesses, that is what's going to augment your business. That is what's going to allow the tech, maybe you're not using it all yet, to build on what you're already doing. But it's quite a big shift for many of us, right? For many of us, taking on analytics, taking on machines to do things that people used to do within our own careers is very transformative. It's definitely a shift. So I'm going to look at 5 key ways that we can all evolve in this time period, in this fourth revolution, where everything is changing, and it's not just the tech, it's the people around us as well. So what are those 5 things? The first one is to recognize that the generational gaps that are out there have to be filled. We have no choice. Particularly in India, we have one of the largest, if not the largest, working population in the world. We have to bring together the top and the bottom, okay? And I know, because I do this work a lot, that if you're today in the top, that can be quite intimidating. Especially in India, leaders tell me all the time, but Mimi, they don't do it like we did it. They're not as hardworking as we were. They don't do it as quick as we used to do it. There is a massive gap between what the top think is the right way to do it and where the young ones think is the right way to do it, right? But this is not just about age. So there's 4 key points on this. First of all, of course, generations are about age, but it's also about mindset. So you will come across young people that feel exactly like you, and you'll find slightly older people that feel like the young ones. The reality is the mindset has shifted, not just when you were born. The second is that we have to align hybrid working. I have absolutely no context of what you're doing in your organization. What I do know in my work, as I mentioned earlier, is how many leaders are pulling people back to the office in droves. I'm not here to say whether that's right, wrong, or otherwise, but what I am saying is that the youth, on the whole, don't want to come back. They might come back now because you make them, but in time, the businesses that embrace hybrid working, that overcome geographical boundaries, are the ones that can grow. Because, of course, tech does. I'm sure lots of the technology you're using is born in India, but I'm sure lots of it was born in Silicon Valley. It doesn't mean you can't use it, right? So we have to overcome geographical boundaries. And, of course, COVID taught us we could. The knowledge economy is alive and well. We don't need to be in the same room to grow together. We need flatter structures, and again, I don't have the context of any of your teams, so this is a generalization. We need flatter structures because if we're going to increase empathy, if we're going to show people that we're listening to them a little bit more, we have to be able to hear them. And if you're all the way at the top and they're all the way down there and there's 20 layers in between you, it's impossible to hear them, right? There's too far to go. So if we're going to create organizations that hear each other more, we're going to have to, over time, not in 10 minutes, pull them together and make them flatter so that you can hear those voices. Equally, I'm not going to talk about it today, but if you have a diversity and inclusion agenda, the flatter structures are critical. You can't be inclusive if you don't talk to anyone and you're far away from everybody else, right? So we have to flatten our organizations. And the last one is to create open conversation. And I know how intimidating this can be, because often you feel like if you open up conversation, you lose control. I'm here to tell you that with Gen Z, with the young ones, if you open up conversation, you gain control, okay? I have an intern in my team. He's from here. He's from India. We work in Dubai together. And I asked him about 2 years ago, Habib, tell me, what are all your other friends doing? And he said, in all honesty, Mimi, none of them took a job. They're all obviously young Indians. Why? Why didn't they take a job? And he said to me super honestly, because they don't think you can teach them anything. And I was like, oh, good news. That was a waste of 18 years of career. But the reality is, what he went on to explain to me is, and it's true, Gen Z think we ruined the world, okay? And they're not that wrong. We kind of did. You look at when they were born and what they've seen since they were born, and then, of course, they look up to us and they think, well, how did you let that happen? How did you let, sustainability get so out of control? How did you let a global pandemic sweep the earth? You name it, they blame us. So that open conversation helps you overcome that and come back together and allow them to see that they can learn. I put this example up here. He says I should use the phone. I say I can do it on Instagram, so he tells me I'm lazy. I can't tell you how many times I hear this, right? The older generation want to use telephone. They're like, can you call the customer, please? The young guys are like, no, I just Instagrammed him. And the older person is like, that doesn't count. You need to call him. And he's like, no, he's already given me the answer. We're meeting on Thursday. And then the older guy leaves the meeting and says, oh, these youth, they're so lazy. They can't even be bothered to pick up the phone. It was nothing to do with being lazy. That is hers medium of communication. Actually, they barely ever use, I don't even really use my phone anymore, but I hear this example all the time. That diversity of life stage is separating out how we see the world, but also how we work in the world. So don't be so quick to jump to conclusions and think because they're not doing it your way, that that's the wrong way. Because maybe that's just the new way. Or maybe there's a space in between the two. But what I would say is this: we are all more alike than we are different. We may do things differently. We may use different platforms. Some of us are totally happy with data and analytics and AI and some type of bot doing their shopping. Some of us less so. But when you look at us as human beings, the young ones, the old ones, everybody across your team, we're more alike than we are different. And I want to play one example that brings this to life from popular culture. I'm not going to introduce it. I'm just going to play it, hopefully really loud. So what can 007 teach us about we're all more alike than we are different? Quite a lot, I'd have you know. 1962, that started. The next one's coming next year, is basically exactly the same. Right, did you notice? It's all exactly the same. The actors change, the cars get a bit faster, the guns change shape. Whether you are 16 today or 60 today, you're basically watching the same movie. We love the same things. We are motivated by the same things. We want the same things. We just observe it and absorb it differently. And that is what organizational empathy is about. That is what leadership in times of change is about, finding those points that remind you that we're all more alike than we are different. Number 2, surprisingly, is to embrace empathy as a data set and as a cultural imperative. So I often talk about empathy as humanity's data set, and I really want to say this one more time. This is not a soft skill. Okay, there is nothing soft about empathy. Hard to master, hard to find, hard to maintain. But when you get it right, not only do you have data about your biggest customers, about procurement, about that customer who's been with you for 39 years and suddenly wants to change supplier. Why? Why are they making those decisions? Empathy is your data set. But it is also a cultural imperative. The generations coming through will demand of you that you listen to them, that you hear them, and if you don't, they will walk out. We are on the edge of an employee revolution. And for anyone that has followed the relatively recent case with KPMG in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, you will see that what was once known, I guess, as a whistleblower, somebody speaking up about something, has shifted one of the top 5 consultancy firms in the world and lost them, I don't know how many millions, tens of millions across the Middle East. Because an employee said, hang on a minute, I'm not just going to sit here anymore. They're not scared of you. They're not scared of HR. They're not scared of anybody. Okay? It is a cultural imperative. It is also, by the way, an emotional health imperative. If you look at the mental health issues flying across our world, we need to improve our working world if we are to keep the talent that we're so carefully training and bringing into our businesses. I want to give you one tip about how you can try to do this in the week ahead, perhaps in the conference tomorrow. One of the easiest ways to embrace empathetic listening, empathetic leadership, is to do this, is to change the word why to the words what's stopping you. Now, the word why is a really good word because it's a curious word, right? So when you use curious words, tell me why did that happen, tell me more, you can empathize, you are gaining insight. But the challenge with the word why is if you're ever in a situation of not even conflict, it could just be an awkward conversation. Let's pretend I owe you a presentation. And I say, I'm going to have that presentation to you on Thursday at 3:30. And then I come to you at 3 o'clock and I say, I'm sorry, it's not done. What are you going to say? Why? Mimi, why is it not done? I have to go on in 30 minutes, okay? I knew you were going to say why. So I have completely moved already to autopilot to answer that for you. Because this happened and the iPad broke and then whatever the reasons were, right? If you change that to what's stopping you, you'll see a really interesting thing happen. First of all, that person's eyes will move, either up or down, it depends on their neuroprocessing, but their eyes will move, and you will completely catch them off guard. So you'll say, well, what's stopping you? And they'll go, oh, well, what's stopping me is, and then they'll tell you. What it does is it completely shifts their leverage of their subconscious. It moves them out of autodrive, it's neuroscience, into cognitive thought. And in so doing, they give you information. So if empathy is humanity's data set, or the corporate workplace's data set, phrases like what's stopping you, and there are many of them, by the way, take autopilot away in your business and actually create conscious connection, which gives you more insight than you would otherwise have access to. There are lots of these. Anyone that wants a few more, find me on Instagram. I will happily send them to you. Fundamentally, it's about using the brain to access different levels of information in your team. The third is to move from emotional intelligence to enterprise social intelligence. You hear a lot about emotional intelligence, right? EQ. And I think there's quite a lot of misunderstanding of what it is. But fundamentally, emotional intelligence is all about you. Okay? It's about you understanding yourself and how well you can do in the workplace, how well you engage as a leader. It's all about you. Social intelligence, which I promise you again, along with empathy, you will now see everywhere, is the ability to connect with other people around you. Empathy is one of them, by the way. Empathy is part of social intelligence. But fundamentally, enterprise social intelligence is about shifting your business to the we, to the whole, to the sum of all parts, to be able to listen, to communicate better, to encourage collaboration, to engage. And by the way, if you map all 4 of those back to the digital world, you're going to find all other terms that say the same thing about scrums and agile processes, and it's all exactly the same thing. I'm talking about the human of the process that the tech is going through. So we have to shift to a place where we have more social intelligence, because 42% of people still prefer to be in person. Right? Nearly half of us would rather be in person engaging. So nearly 50% of your workforce wants to be together. You're going to need to be able to work out how to really significantly improve that social engagement. I predict that 2023 will be the year that listening leadership goes mainstream. That suddenly everywhere, all over the world, and let's hope it starts here in India, that leaders talk less and listen more. That is the key. That is the key to so much of this shift. not being fearful of what the change might be, but listening to those that can take you through the change. That is how we're going to go and embrace all that the fourth revolution has to offer. Number 4, machines can't tell stories. They can do lots of amazing things, but they can't do this, at least not yet. Okay? They can't tell a story about Satya Nadella and a crying child on a street and actually get anybody to listen to them, because they'd probably tell it like Siri, right? You're probably not going to listen. So what we know about human beings, your customers, the people you negotiate with, the people in finance, your CFO, our brains become more active when we tell stories. You can't stop that, by the way. So when you watched James Bond just now, the way that your neurons responded were immediately shift because of the car chasing. When you see something here going very fast, your brain shifts. When you hear a story, you can't not respond. It's natural, okay? Human beings respond to stories. We are all natural-born storytellers. We've been doing it since the caveman era, when we were drawing on walls to tell each other things. In fact, there is some research out there that says up to 75% of our communication on a daily basis is storytelling, or some people call it gossip, but it's pretty much the same thing. We are in the age of brand journalism, okay? If your brand is not telling its story, it's going to have to soon. And there is no category, not yarn, not cement, not lasers, not chemicals, that doesn't need a story. I promise you, I work in B2B, there is a story to be told everywhere, and most of it's already in your team. The machines can't do that, so that's something to focus on. And then the 5th one is that all of this change, all of it's available to you if you shift your mindset. Okay? Change is just about mindset. Look back at all the countless things that your group has already successfully navigated. You don't get to be over 100 years old without changing all the time. You guys are actually a result of the change. Change, back to the beginning, is our only constant. And your group has led in that change forever. So this 4th revolution, where we have new machines and new artificial ways to change things, it's just the platform, guys. The changes were happening already. Now we're just doing it on a different platform. I love that the gentleman before me already told you this, because I feel like he's got much bigger advice than I do. He said this. He said, take big bets. He just said it with a really cool graph and like an S-curve or something. I'm doing it with a Tiffany's Nike shoe because I'm a marketer and I can get away with it. Take big bets. Because if you don't, someone else will. Probably somebody younger, possibly somebody younger than your own children. Okay? Disruption is here to stay. This shoe is 48 hours old, I think. It is the first time we've ever seen a fine jeweler create a sports shoe, and I think it was sold out before the picture went online, to be honest. Okay? If you don't do it, however crazy it feels, however scary it feels, if you don't do it, someone else will. And as you heard earlier, to catch up is hard work. So fundamentally, I've spoken about 3 things this afternoon: curiosity, listening, understanding. These 3 things, as leaders, are the foundation to mitigating the risk and protecting your success in these changing times. You have to embrace the tech. You have to make the shift. You have to move because your competition already is. If you can bring these 3 things into the process, you will bring everyone with you on that. And you know better than I do that if your team is with you, you're far more likely to win. Tech evolves us, but leadership connects us. That is why you are all here today. It is about people over platform. So don't be scared of the platform because people made it in the first place and people will run it for you. Consider the people and the platform will take care of itself. Every day, literally every single day, I say this on a stage or in a meeting room somewhere in the world. The more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. And to be quite honest, there has never been a time in our businesses or our world when we have needed that empathy more than now. I have one final thing to ask you today, and it's this. Are you listening? Thank you very much for having me. My name's Mimi. I think I have about 10 minutes for questions. If anyone, look at that. That was like Speedy Gonzalez's hand, this lady in the front. Hello.
Hi, Mimi, and thank you so much. This is a subject closest to my heart. And I always say that even data has emotions.
Yes.
And we have to read those emotions in that data, and therefore our response will be really, much different than what we can anticipate from data. So I have a question, and I've been struggling with this. I am with HR, and I have just launched an employer brand for the Aditya Birla Capital Group. And my research has always said that there are two sides of human beings. I mean, left-hand side, right-hand side, but when it comes to work, left-hand side has become hygiene, and the differentiators are the right-hand side.
Yes.
Yeah. So in business context, it's always been a balanced scorecard, and that's how we've been talking about it. We started with metrics which were quantitative, then we added qualitative metrics, and now I feel that we need to add emotional metrics as well to that card, which will be the third dimension of it. Yeah. And most of our corporates are missing that out.
Yes.
So I'm at that stage to be able to identify. Empathy is at the top.
Yeah,
but I want to be able to measure it.
Yes.
Because what I believe is what measures gets delivered.
Absolutely.
Would you have some views and thoughts on how to get that done in my organization?
Yes. Thank you for the question. And I love what you said there about what you measure, becomes, because I say the same thing, what you measure manifests. Measuring emotions is obviously harder than measuring a business shift. You can't track, well, we sold, 55 more metric tons than we did last year, right? It's much less direct. But the main way that we shift and measure emotions is over time. And actually, often it's quite old-fashioned in that it's things like questionnaires, it's things like conversations in the workplace, it's things like open discussions or open forums, something we do called listening rooms where people are able to give feedback. You can measure that. You can measure shift in sentiment. You guys were talking earlier about Net Promoter Score. It's actually not that different, right? It's about measuring the shift of perception and emotion over time. You can then layer in various metrics like number of resignations, length of tenure, age of resignations, right? If you track that data, you'll suddenly see, I suspect, I don't know if you have any resignations, but if you do, I suspect they're all under 30, right? So then you can start to say, okay, so where are people leaving and why are they leaving? And by the way, are we doing our exit interviews far too late? And what is it that's compounding that? But it's not something you can measure this quarter to next quarter. You can measure it this quarter to the fourth quarter and start to create that shift. And to your point about what you measure manifests, if you do not build those markers into culture, into your leaders' requirements to measure their teams, you're going to lose before you're going to begin. Because you could say, I don't know your role, but pretend you're the head of talent. You could say, we are going to start measuring empathy. We're going to be India's most empathetic organization. But if the 15 leaders in the C-suite next to you don't ever do it, the young people are going to look at you and say, well, you lied, right? You're not living it. And the young ones today are super hard on that, right? If you say you're going to do it, you better do it, otherwise don't say it. So there are ways to do it. Some of them are they're all very human, but they take time. And it's about measuring that sentiment shift over time. And I would say the other part of that is having the buy-in of your leadership team that when you have that result, you'll do something with it. There's no point measuring it, finding out something you don't like, and then ignoring it, because it will do more damage than good. I hope that answered it.
Is there anybody else? Yes. Could you please stand up, and we have a runner who will hand a mic to you, sir.
Oh, here. Hello.
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful experience we have today, empathy. So I just saw one of your slide that empathy, we can master it.
Yes.
So I think, can you advise something where, you can advise to the leaders where, we can master the empathy in terms of any spiritual guidance or maybe any practices?
Yes.
So that it will help us?
Absolutely. Again, it's not something I can cover in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But the areas of that are all across different human spectrums. Listening is the backbone. So anyone that has children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews will know that when we have small children, we teach them to listen all the time. Listen to auntie, listen to uncle, listen to mummy. Every day we remind them to listen to other human beings. As we move into senior school, university, the workplace, and leadership, we stop reminding each other. So the first piece of work that I do, but lots of other businesses do as well in this space, is train us how to listen. I didn't put it up today, but one of the things I normally say is, are you listening to understand, or are you listening to reply? Most of us, like 98% of the time, are listening to reply. The person speaking, and you're working out, yes, but I'm going to tell him the timeline doesn't work, and blah, 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 right, all of those things. So if you were going to make one investment into your leadership's shift, it would be simply that, and it's not super quick. It takes a bit of practice, but like all skills, once you practice it, it becomes permanent. There are other then slightly more tactical pieces around things like body language, neurolinguistics, so the one I gave you around what's stopping you. There are lots of those. Ways to shift language, and they work in any language, by the way, so it doesn't obviously have to be in English. It's about how you use the structure of your sentence to communicate to those people. So some of it's in neurolinguistics, some of it's in body language, lots of it's in listening. And the last piece I would say is it's in an innate interest to be curious in your people. You know, empathy is not about judgment, it's not about agreement, and it's not about action. You don't have to fix whatever they're telling you. And I think that's why often leaders don't want to listen, because they're scared that they can't fix whatever we say. But empathy can be hugely high. You don't have to create change. You just have to acknowledge. So those are some of the things that you could start to shift.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question? We'll take one last question.
There's one
Maybe
here.
1 + 1, two of you there. Can we combine questions if that's okay?
Yeah,
Is
for
that okay
sure.
with you, Mimi?
Yeah, as long as they're not
Could you
super long.
please raise your question? The three of you who want to ask a question, could you please stand up? Yeah, and our runner will be right here with the question. Yes, sir, we'll start with you.
I just want to know, you are telling the future leaders will be listening more.
Sorry, say that again.
The leaders will be listening more, or rather, they will be the leaders who listen more.
Yes.
Is there any scale or development at country level or at global level to measure the empathy levels? Because we still see big countries fighting at the value of human lives.
Yes.
So there cannot be any big example than this where the empathy or the humanity is at its low. Is there any such way of measuring at national level what is the empathy level of so-and-so country?
Thank you for the question. The answer is yes, you can measure it, but the answer is also no, nobody is. What we do know on a top level is that societies that are more pro-social, that are collectivist in nature, have natural levels of empathy that are higher. In places where we see higher levels of individualism, we also see higher levels of segregation, separation, loneliness. In some cities in the world today, up to 60% of people live alone, all alone, right? So we do know that countries can be mapped by that level of pro-social collectivist society versus individualistic societies. And we do start to see the shift in that. But no, nobody's actually measuring it. So if you guys would like to join me in measuring the whole world, I'll take you up on it.
Well, thank you, Mimi. We'll take two back-to-back questions. Yeah, over
Okay.
to you.
So, Mimi, my question was like you said, the empathy in leadership, but there's also empathy in the brands. Like when you saw in COVID,
Yeah.
if the brands didn't show empathy, customers were trolling, consumers were pushing you off. They were not accepting. So, is there any matrix, like he was asking about the country matrix for empathy, in the brand valuation and the organization valuation, does empathy also score in? Is there some value like that?
Since it's the same question and a sub-question, I think she answered or touched upon. There's a deeper understanding, if I may add on to it. So I'll
yeah.
give you a moment to
Okay.
think on. We'll take the next question, please. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Mimi. I just had a question. As you were talking and you were emphasizing a lot on the listening, to me at Aditya Birla Group, we are building a culture of coaching.
Yep.
And to me, that could be potentially a solution in terms of building that empathy. And just wanted your perspective, anything that you've seen from an experience point of view, with other organizations.
Yes.
To
thank you.
reiterate, the question is on how to build empathy.
So we are building a culture of coaching, and what's the role that could play. My assumption is it could play a big role in building empathy. Just wanted your
Yes.
perspective on it.
Yeah, I'll answer in 20 seconds. The answer is absolutely yes. Coaching is a huge part of empathy. In fact, the reason that coaching is so effective, 80% of it, is because you're being heard, you're being listened to. What I would say is really important is that the coaches that are coaching, you need to make sure that they are the right coaches, because we have bigger issues if people are listened to by the wrong people. So, but yes, if you have a culture of coaching on its way, you can absolutely pack that into increased empathy. And to answer your question about brand, but we can catch up in the break, yes, there are brands that are seen as more empathetic, and they do a better job at engaging authentically, and many of them are B2B, not just B2C. But there's also a lot of fakes out there. And as we know, people, consumers, humans, are really good at sniffing out a fake. So the brands that are winning are the ones that do it authentically, and not the ones that just throw the word empathy into their PR press release. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mimi Nicklin. Everybody, let's give her a round of applause. I'd like to hold you on with us on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite Kunkupu Amma to hand over the memento as a token of love and gratitude to Mimi for joining us here today. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. We all had a great time. Didn't we? Can we give her a round of applause, everybody? Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Thanks a lot.